This is American Real. I am Roger Brooks. My guest today is Paul Levy. You are a wounded healer in private practice and a pioneer in the field of spiritual emergence. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Really, thank you so much for inviting me.
And man, I've really been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. We were introduced by a mutual friend, Anthony Brunelli, or Tony Brunelli, who I've known my whole life, and you've recently met. And we have this deep connection that goes beyond what I think Tony even told you. So the first thing is, I'm broadcasting here in the studio from Binghamton, New York. That's where you went to school. You went to school at Harper College back in the 70s. Tell us about your connection and a little bit about the time that you spent in Binghamton.
Yeah, well, it's a major part of my life in that I came into Binghamton one person and I exited a totally different person. In that, you know, I was very academic coming in, and when I graduated, I realized I was a creative artist, and I was, you know, really committed to following that path. And but the shadow, I don't know, I hesitate to say shadow, but I think that's an apt word. The shadow aspect of what happened in Binghamton is it was the time when I experienced this unbelievable trauma as I was individuating and separating from my family and stepping into being an artist. That was the very thing that catalyzed this trauma. And you know, I won't go into the story, but when I left Binghamton, I was deeply dealing with what had happened via that trauma. And that catalyzed the whole trajectory for the rest of my life in a different way than I had planned. You know, so because within a couple of years of exiting Binghamton, I was in so much pain as a result of the trauma, and I had gone so deeply inwards into the pain and into my mind, trying to unlock what was happening, that a couple of years later, I had a spiritual awakening that almost killed me. It was so over the top profound. And in essence, I was realizing that we're having a collective dream. And I was so excited that I got myself in deep trouble. And within 24 hours, I got thrown into a mental hospital. And during those next almost 2 years, I was just a free agent out in the world who was having this life-transforming spiritual awakening, but I hadn't integrated it because it was so overwhelming. And so I had this tendency, probably about 3 or 4 other times, to get myself thrown in mental hospitals and told I was crazy and had a mental illness and would need to be on pharmaceuticals. And I knew it couldn't have been made more clear to me, you know, that I was having a spiritual awakening. So I never for a second bought into that. But that experience that destroyed my entire family. You know, I haven't had a family for like 20 years or something like that. And I mean, but I'm all good. I have like a huge, you know, friend group and soul family and spiritual community. But that was part of what happened, and the whole seed for that started in Binghamton.
Man, and we'll get into that a little bit more, I'm sure. But the other connection I wanted to bring to your attention is that I went to school in Portland, Oregon, and that's where you reside.
Oh my God, that's where I live right now. Sure. Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, so I spent about 6 years in Portland. That's where I feel that I kind of found myself. I went as far across the country as I could to actually leave Binghamton. And then after I got married to my wife, who's from Binghamton, we moved back. But I also have a deep connection to Portland. And it was an amazing time. And it's a really amazing place in our country.
Right, totally.
But Paul, I also wanted to tell you this morning before I came into the studio, I did something a little different than I normally do. I drove my car over to Recreation Park.
Oh, wow.
Which is on Beethoven Street.
Right.
And I just sat and thought and really just did nothing other than think. And I wanted to try to set the stage for today. And if you could tell us a little bit about your experience at Recreation Park here in Binghamton and how that may have changed your life or your life trajectory?
Sure. Well, I mean, there was a summer, an amazing summer. I think it was probably closer to when I was a senior, or maybe I was still, or just finished or about to finish. And I was living in a house right across the street from Rec Park. And every morning I get woken up by the carousel. And, so that's one of my fondest memories. And I'm pretty sure that's the first time that I took LSD. It's not that I do that a lot these days. But I'm pretty sure I just remember like I was lying in the park on the grass, and a friend of mine asked me, because I had a bunch of friends with me who were really curious to see my first trip on acid. And he was asking me, oh, has it come on yet? And I remember at that moment, I had totally melted into the earth and I was one with the universe. And it was just one of those questions that was just very, very funny to me. So yeah, I have some real associations to Recreation Park for sure.
And, the other thing that I have your book here, Dispelling Wetiko. I just started getting into it. Wetiko, and I would love for you to get into it to kind of set the stage for today's conversation. But basically, from what I understand, it means the mind virus, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the meanings. It's this Native American term, and it really connotes like the spirit of evil. And it's sort of a psycho-spiritual disease of the soul. But one really good way of thinking about it is like this virus of the mind. And, with all the talk about COVID and the coronavirus, I've been pointing out, that the real virus, the deadly virus that's really threatening our species is the Wetiko mind virus. And, so it operates through the unconscious. We all potentially have it. It exists in potential in the collective unconscious of our species. And it only has power over us to the extent we don't see it. That's why my whole, I have 2 other books coming out in the next year on the mind virus. And I'm trying to point it out to people so that they can see it. Because when you see it, you take away its power and you empower, itself. And what it does, so see, every spiritual tradition from time immemorial is pointing at Wetiko, just not using that name. They're all describing it in their own one-of-a-kind way, very creatively, and also thinkers and philosophers and creative artists. They've all been pointing at this mind virus. And so it's not just, I'm just a translator. I just, because I was experiencing it in my life. And, and one, just to create context, when I mentioned the trauma that happened when I was in Binghamton, and that created enormous pain and suffering, and, it was just over the top. That was my first direct experience of Wetiko, though I didn't have the name. And then when I had the awakening, and then I got thrown in mental hospitals, and then I couldn't believe the insanity and the trauma, just the how insane the mental health system is. And I realized, oh my God, that same dark energy, that Wetiko energy, though I didn't have the name for it then, was now in a different channel. It was operating not just through my family or through my father, who is its instrument, but now had shifted channels and was operating through psychiatry. And the thing which was amazing, I began to understand that whenever I was trying to point at it, to point at the darkness, the evil that was coming through, be it the psychiatric system or my father, that the field, people in the field, in my family, friends, the psychiatrists, they would all configure to protect the abuser. And I just couldn't believe that, but I began to recognize that was showing me something, that was teaching me about, there was some sort of higher dimensional process that was unfolding through the trauma and all the darkness. And so all of that, all of what I had went through on a personal experience with my family and having my family just destroyed, and then with psychiatry, in a way, that was my descent into the shamanic underworld to help me understand what I had come up against. Because I was having a direct, unmediated encounter with archetypal evil. There was no question about that. And but I was fortunate in that I was able to keep my awareness and keep my heart open, and more just creating maps and taking notes and understanding, oh my God, there's something that I'm seeing that every wisdom tradition has been pointing at, that encoded in Wetiko, it's a quantum phenomena. And what I mean by that is that it's the source of the greatest evil, but encoded in it is its own medicine. And not only its own medicine, it actually is helping us. It's helping us to wake up to who we are and to the nature of our world and our place in it. So that's an amazing thing, that Wetiko, being a quantum phenomena, is similar to, like, well, what is light, a wave, or a particle? Wetiko contains the source of the greatest evil imaginable, and it also has this incredible blessing. Like if Wetiko didn't exist, if the mind virus didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. That's how important it is, because it's catalyzing our evolution. But if we don't have the recognition of what it's showing us, it'll destroy us.
So, Paul, can you describe a little bit, if you could go back to the first experiences, and can you just give us some idea of what was happening? Like, how did you become aware of this? What was the spiritual awakening like?
Yeah. Okay. So the spiritual awakening, there were a couple of components. So keep in mind, it all got catalyzed by just unbelievable deep pain and trauma. And that's typical of the shamanic archetype, that, the person, the would-be shaman healer, and I'm not any shaman, just I'm in my dreams, my wild dreams, I'm a shaman, but I'm just an ordinary person. My teachers, they're the shamans. But there was deep pain and suffering. I went from a highly functioning person, all throughout my life in high school and at Binghamton, I was a really good student. All of a sudden, the trauma happened, and it stopped me. I couldn't go on with my life. It stopped me from living my life. It was so overwhelming. So it literally forced me to deal with it, because I had no choice. And so then, by going into my mind, and just assuming the position of observer and trying to witness what was happening, that was the only thing I found that was helping the suffering. And then after almost, 18 months, 20 months, something like that, I got hit by a bolt of lightning, but not from the sky, but lightning just ignited inside of my brain. And then within hours, I went into this extreme state in which I began to realize this is a dream. And just like being in a dream at night and having this lucid dream, I was having a lucid dream, but the dream that I was lucid in was this dream. And I was realizing, oh my God, we're all dreaming up this dream into materialization each and every moment. And, that's why I was so excited and enthusiastic. And it was like having this radical personality change. And that's what, my friend, who actually I had met at Binghamton, he was visiting me in the Bay Area. And he was so, concerned. He brought me to my ambulance to a mental hospital. And so on the one hand, that was the first part of the experience, having the recognition of the dreamlike nature, that we're all characters in each other's dreams, we're not separate. But then, as it unfolded, and I got thrown in mental hospitals and just abused by psychiatry, and I can go into that. It was unbelievable nightmare, what they did. But the essence was, then I began to have a direct encounter with evil. And so it wasn't just like this awakening and it's all light and love and all that. I mean, that was at first, but then it was as if me connecting with that light then made me aware of these darker archetypal forces of evil. And that's what I, then had to come to terms with. And that's really the stuff, the material that out of which my whole body of work on Wetiko has emerged. It was from the experience, not only of the light, but of dark.
So, Paul, have you met or talked to any other people that have gone through the same or similar experiences?
Yeah. Well, my very best friend, He had an awakening within a year or two that I did, right in the same place I did. And he's a scientist, and he's like so brilliant, and he got the same thing, thrown in mental hospitals and told he was crazy. And so when we met, and when the moment we met, he was like, "Oh, tell me about yourself." And I right away was like, "Oh, I had a spiritual awakening and was thrown in mental hospitals." And that's my opening line. That's like, who I am really. Because at first I was so embarrassed by that and mortified by it. But then once I began to heal, I realized, no, this is like, I'm happy to share this. This was my own process. And he almost fell off his chair when I was saying that to him, because that was his experience. And so, yeah, my best friend, but also I'm in private practice helping people who are going through similar experiences of having spiritual emergencies. And so many people all over the world are having experiences like this. And unfortunately, if they get in the clutches of psychiatry, they're going to probably be diagnosed and pathologized. And because they're in such a fragile state, as soon as authority figures see them as pathological, it's going to make them sick. And then once they become sick, that confirms the psychiatrist's viewpoint that they are sick, and it becomes a feedback loop. It's as if they're getting put under a spell by psychiatry. And there are literally people who are, it's tragic, who are probably in backward wards of mental hospitals who are having spiritual emergencies, but it didn't get recognized, and they were failed initiation, and they just got caught in the web of psychiatry. So I think there's so many people around the world who are, seeing this is like, there's something insane going on in the world. The Wetiko virus, it's a collective psychosis. So many people are realizing there's something amiss. They're recognizing there's something real evil happening. There's like this collective insanity. And my work on Wetiko is unbelievably helpful for people to create contact for not only seeing that, but how to deal with it and how to extract the gift from it.
So how do you do your research, and how are you able to write this book? Where did all of this come from?
Right. No, totally. And that's where, like, I think in the back of the book, I had written the book, I had given it to the publisher, and then they said to me, "Oh, well, could you add a personal context, or how were you able to author such a book? What gives you the authority to write about evil in the way you do?" Because I have absolute authority in writing about it because it came from my own experience, and I don't need any outside validation or certification. And so I did. In the afterword of that book, I wrote about the initial experience. So I began having experiences, not only direct encounters with archetypal evil, but also having these experiences that were so out of ordinary and so out of the bounds of what was considered possible, and actually experiences that were what I thought were impossible, that were just happening. And I began to understand, and I'm still unpacking what was shown to me during the awakening, that I was more and more like getting initiated into this dream and what that actually means, and how that is something that when you plug into that, you connect with the fact that we are these creative beings and that we have this immense creative power. So it's interesting because me having this understanding and this experience of the incredible creativity that is flowing through me and that's going through all of us, it has to do with that encounter with evil. It's as if imprisoned in the darkness is our creative spirit. And if we turn away from it, then we become, split and fractured and fragmented. And then we're not really able to tap into our source, which is the creative source of the universe. But there was something about the direct encounter with evil and the fact that not turning away from it, but 24/7 for 40 years, I've been trying to unpack what came my way, and the more I integrate it, the more I'm just becoming a channel for my books to come through.
So, and Paul, at a rudimentary level, we hear things like the dark night of the soul or embrace the dark side. Is this kind of what you're uncovering here?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, the dark night of the soul, because there's something in, St. John of the Cross, the author of the dark night of the soul, talks about the reiterated death. And it's a dark, so some people think, oh yeah, this weekend I'll get through my dark night of the soul, or this month or whatever. But the reiterated death is like, it's like the dying and the death, it gets reiterated, moment after moment, day after day, weeks, months, years. And I've been going through that. So profoundly, intensely. And of course, it's in, popular culture to deal with your shadow and all that. And that's the personal shadow. And absolutely, I'm also talking about the archetypal shadow. And just to associate for a second, the experience I've been having, the more closer I get to the light and to my light and to who I am, what I notice is that the more the darker forces seem to be like amplified and trying to stop me or, trying to attack me. And so at first, when this first began happening, I would interpret it like, wow, I'm really screwed up. I really have a problem. This is evidence of it. But over the course of time, I began to understand, no, that's a sign that I'm on the right path. Of course, it makes perfect sense when somebody is getting close to the light. Well, what else would we expect but the darker forces who are invested in keeping the light in the dark are going to do everything they can to stop the person who's actually, bringing forth the light. And that's a great way of, framing, like reframing our experience. Because so many of us, as we're connecting with our creativity, with our compassion, with our light, these darker forces come up, and we'll feel resistance, we'll get distracted, and we indulge in that. And it's a shame, because then we don't continue our unfoldment into our nature, which is the true nature of life. And we dissociate. So I'm hoping me saying this is going to help people who are really in the arena of trying to come to terms with their own nature and their own light, instead of, turning away when they meet obstacles and resistance. No, those are allies. Those are like pointing that you're on the right path.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, many, I've had the opportunity to interview many people who are peak performers in whatever field they are, and many of them say the same thing, that the more good you do, the closer you get to your goal, the more resistance there is. So the science behind this, whether you call it the laws of the universe or whatever it may be, that is there. I mean, and for you to once again emphasize it at a whole different level, from a scientific and from a personal level, just I think reinforces the fact that this is a universal law that is inflexible.
Totally. No, totally. And the thing is, what I'm pointing out, so if we don't come to terms with Wetiko, or whatever name we call it, in the apocryphal text of the Bible, it's all, they point at Wetiko, they call it the counterfeiting spirit. And interestingly, that got edited out of the Bible. And I point that in my next book, that Wetiko was on the editorial board of the Bible, making sure that the counterfeiting spirit phrase got edited out, because it can't stand to be seen. And what the counterfeiting spirit is that it doesn't have any creativity at all, but it's a master impersonator. So it puts us on, it will impersonate us. And by putting us on, has a double meaning of putting us on like a suit of clothes, but it'll trick us, it'll fool us. That's the put us on. And then if we're not awake in that moment, we'll identify with the counterfeiting spirit's its image of who we are, of people's version of who we are. Limited, I'm wounded, I'm traumatized, I'm not creative, or whatever. We then step into its image of ourselves. And as soon as we do that, then we're gone. Because you see, the thing about Wetiko, it can't possess our true nature, because our true nature is beyond being possessed. But what Wetiko does, it sets up this simulation of who we are. It impersonates us as soon as we identify with its simulation, then it has us. Because then it possesses, then it can possess that. And then it's like we become the puppet on a string and it's controlling the strings. And the point is this, is that by whatever name we call it, and in fairy tales, it's important to find the name of the demon. When I'm pointing at, like, it doesn't have to be Wetiko, it can be any name that really objectifies and speaks to your mind, that helps you to have the recognition of this energy, that if we as a species don't come to terms with Wetiko, or whatever name you call it, we're totally doomed. There's no question about that. But yet encoded in the Wetiko spirit, like I've been saying, it's offering us, it's helping us to wake up to the dreamlike nature, and it's showing us how important the psyche is in creating our experience. Being a dream, the origin of dreams is the psyche. And so the point is that Wetiko, it's actually, when we have the recognition of it, it's unlocking the creative spirit that it's in, because it doesn't have creativity, but it'll like plug into our creativity and inspire us to be creative in a way that feeds it and fills us. Okay, so that's pointing out that the real cure for Wetiko is for any of us to really plug in to our creative nature, and then particularly when we connect with other people who are doing that, and we get in phase with each other, that's where we discover we can change the way we dream. And that's not any new age rule. That's like what this is all about. And that's to actually realize that we can participate in our own evolution.
So, Paul, what would you say from a percentage basis? Out of 100 people, out of 1,000 people, out of 1 million people, how many people understand this?
Well, from one point of view, like I would say everyone does. Deep down, our nature understands itself, and our nature, we've already had realization, and people are presenting a very convincing, I call it like the Halloween costume. They're presenting a very seductively convincing Halloween costume that they don't understand it. And, so, I mean, your question is it's an interesting question. Because from one point of view, I could say, oh, many people don't, or most people don't, or 1 out of 100 do, or whatever. But from another point of view, this universe is a dream that's pulsing in and out of the void every nanosecond, recreating itself anew. And how am I, as a dreamer, going to dream it? Am I going to dream that, oh, people really don't get it, and then I have to try to enlighten them? Well, if I'm doing that, well, then who's the one who's asleep? It's me, because their nature is to be awake. So what I've learned to do, and my teachers taught me this. An example being, when I would go to my teachers, I met these two of my teachers. They have a monastery right outside Binghamton. You can get to meet them. And I would, they were in New York, and I had gotten out of last hospital, and I was deeply, deeply suffering from the trauma, not just from my father, but then from the hospitalization. And I would go to them like every 2 days for years, telling them the pain, the suffering, and the demons and the evil. And at a certain point, I realized they weren't taking me seriously. I mean, they were honoring what I was saying, but they weren't getting hooked on it. They weren't seeing me in this limited state. They were seeing me in my wholeness. They were, the Paul that they were having a relationship to was, a healed, whole, awakened Paul. And by them seeing me that way, and they could only see me that way because they were in touch with that part of themselves, that created a bridge that helped me to step into that part of me, and so what I realized is that that's what I do with people. If I get entranced by their Halloween costumes, what I call it, by their limited wounded part, then I'm colluding with their wound. And that's what a lot of therapists do. Oh, I can help you with that. But they're still like solidifying the person who's being wounded. But if you actually see who they are, they're in their wholeness, and you can only do that if you're in touch with your own wholeness, you are helping them to snap out of the spell of imagining that they have a problem. Because that's the insight of the Buddha, in essence. The Buddha realized that our situation is not problematic in the way we've been imagining it. That's the realization of the Buddha, in essence.
So I'm just trying to get to the base of this, the most basic form of, like, in our current climate right now, what do you say to people? What can you offer to, I don't know if we call it dispel this or to understand it?
Right. Well, the thing about Wetiko, there is, one of the things that I do in my work, I'm continually circumambulating it and describing it in an imaginative way in as many ways as I can imagine, because as soon as you say, oh, it's this, well, then it's not that, it's something else. And, it's not in a particular form. And, but one way of understanding Wetiko is that it's a form of blindness. Okay. And it's a peculiar form of blindness. It's a form of blindness that actually believes that it's sighted. And not only does it believe it's sighted, it believes it's more sighted than people who actually see. And so what's going on in the world, it's really the real fundamental aspect with the polarization in the world, and Wetiko feeds off of separation and polarization and fear. With the polarization in the body politic right now, it's not productive to try to convince somebody who's seeing in a different way than you are, oh no, they really can bring in evidence and facts, and it doesn't make a difference. Because if you're preaching the light to people whose eyes are blind, it's not going to help. So then what I point out in my work is that a better strategy is to teach people the art of seeing, how to see. And that's really interesting. I mean, that opens up a whole deeper conversation because, okay, that sounds great, but what does that mean? Like, how do you do that? And one thing that comes to mind, so many of us have outsourced our own experience. And what I mean, we don't see ourselves. We see ourselves through the imagined eyes of how we imagine other people see us. So we've outsourced our sense of self to others. And the idea of taking back that projection and actually seeing through our own eyes, that's this radical shift. So it involves, really connecting with our own, because, I just want to bring in quantum physics. I wrote a book about quantum physics, because quantum physics, and I'm happy to describe this, has discovered the medicine for Wetiko. And one of the things about quantum physics is that it's pointing out the act of perception is a key part of the universe. So in the moment that we're perceiving the universe, we're playing this crucial function in the creation of the universe via our act of perception. And that's something I could say a lot more about.
So, okay. And I'm really glad you brought up the science part of this, because I think one naturally goes to, if people think this is hokey or whatever they want to think, the fact that you're able to talk to the science of that, is, I think, very beneficial for people to hear. So yes, if we could get into that a little bit, and that was your book called The Quantum Revelation, is that correct?
Right, totally. Yeah, and I'm happy to do that. In essence, because I'm not a physicist at all, and but I'm just somebody who, at a certain point, when I came in contact with quantum physics pretty early on after my awakening, and I began to realize, oh my God, they're describing this world that maps on to the universe that I was experiencing when, I'd snapped out of the consensus reality spell and began to experience all these impossible things. Quantum physics was describing that. And so, in essence, quantum physics, came into our world, 100 years ago, more or less. And before it emerged in our world and in our minds, the pre-quantum physicists thought this universe existed objectively, and they were separate, and they were passive observers, just trying to study it and explore it and try to understand how it worked. Quantum physics came along, and it empirically proved that the act of observing the universe actually influences the universe observed. That's radical. That's a description of a dream. Think about it. You're in a dream, nothing but you're inside your psyche. If you change your perspective in the dream has no choice but to spontaneously shapeshift because the dream is nothing other than your own mind. That's what quantum physics began to point at, that this universe is imbued with mind, with consciousness, that physical reality and consciousness are not separate, just in the dream. And so quantum physics, by pointing out and by proving that the act of observing actually creates the universe that's observed, it's pointing out that the act of observation is creative, that we have this unimaginable, massive, vast, creative agency and power at our disposal, 24/7. We have it right now. But to the extent we aren't aware of it, then, think about a dream. If you're not aware of your creative potency, then seemingly external figures in the dream are more than happy to pick up your power and turn it against you. And so what I'm pointing at is that to quantum physics, by showing that the act of observation is creative, it's unlocking in us this unimaginably, unthinkably vast creative power. And that because we haven't known we have it, or we don't know how to implement it, it's like in a boomerang turning against us. And if I could just say a quick thing, because one way of understanding this, you're in a dream at night, whatever viewpoint you're holding, the dream is reflecting it back because the dream is nothing other than your mind. So if you're holding a viewpoint that this universe is objective in the dream being a reflection of the mind that's observing it has no choice but to shapeshift and reflect back, giving you all the evidence, confirming your viewpoint that the world you're in is objective. So now you have the proof of your viewpoint, so you get more fixed in your viewpoint, and the more fixed in your viewpoint you are of the world being objective, the more the world will appear as objective ad infinitum. That's an infinitely self-perpetuating feedback loop whose origin is your own mind, and you've literally entranced yourself by your own creative power. That's what I'm pointing at. That's Wetiko. And quantum physics comes along and is pointing out there's no objective world. That's a nonsensical idea that only exists as an idea in your head, and it doesn't have any correlate to reality. When you really inquire into that, it can help not only to unlock your creative power, but then it points to, wait, who is the subject? If there's no object, I as a subject need an object to be in relationship with, have to be a subject. If there's no objective world, then who am I? So quantum physics has promoted itself unwittingly to become a spiritual path, to shed light on our nature. And so anyways, and the point is that Wetiko, it feeds off of when we concretize the dream and we think it's other than ourselves, and then we react to our projections as if they're separate, and then we become conditioned and programmed, and the whole origin of that is our own mind. There's nothing doing anything to us, and we're doing it to ourselves. That, in essence, is what we hypnotize ourselves by our creative genius. And what I'm pointing at is that when you see through that process, you unlock your creative genius. This is what alchemy is talking about. This is what Buddhism, this is Gnosticism, this is Kabbalah. Every wisdom tradition in the history of this planet is pointing at this. I'm just a translator, as a Western modern person, trying to translate this indigenous wisdom into an understandable psychological idiom so that it can be helpful and taken on board into our psyche.
And Paul, are the powers to be fearful of this, of uncovering this, of talking about this?
Yeah, my sense, the powers that be, see, quantum physics, Albert Einstein himself, who was one of the founders of quantum physics, who actually famously said that quantum physics is so uncommonly important, it should be everyone's concern. So it's like such an unbelievable, and even though it's 100 years, it's in the first beginning stages of being that path. One thing that about quantum physics, and then you'll see how the powers that be fit into this. There's all this controversy around what it means, right? But the one thing there's no controversy about is that quantum physics is the greatest discovery in all of history. No question at all in the realm of science. Nobody will argue that. What the controversy is what does it mean? And Einstein himself, being one of the founders, couldn't embrace that quantum physics he was still attached, and he openly said this is my opinion, that, yeah, he was attached to that there was an objective world out there, and that he couldn't embrace, no, there's no objective world, i.e. that we're actually creating the world by our observing of it as we're being created by it, and that he couldn't embrace that this was a dream. Now, the powers that be, my sense, they're very aware of, the power that's encoded in quantum physics. They certainly don't want people to understand that, because it would empower people. If we take on board and take online in our psyche what quantum physics is showing us, we become empowered dreamers. And the powers that be don't want that. But even, I would point out, even beyond the powers that be keeping this, and in my book I talk about this, they're keeping this knowledge sort of, hidden in secret in a certain way. What's even more keeping us asleep is that the majority of people, in their mind, they can't embrace the good news that quantum physics is freely offering us. We're so entrained in this limited identity and being conditioned in this limited state that here people, like myself, as just, a spokesperson, are trying to offer this, this unbelievable, this insight, and the realm of possibility is unimaginable, and most people can't even consider it because it's off their radar. That's, I think, what's stopping people from really connecting with the revelations that are emerging.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. And I know a friend of yours, Catherine Austin Fitz, wrote the foreword to your book.
Yeah.
She's been in the news over the last year or so. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, her influence on you, or your friendship, and how her world kind of plays into what you're revealing?
Yeah, totally. Well, so I'm really, really fortunate. I mean, I'm good friends with Catherine for a number of years, and she really helped to teach me, because she's a financial person, and she really helped to teach me how, like, what I call Wetiko is playing out in the financial realm and in economics. And because, in the economic system, that's one of the main vectors that Wetiko, because the thing about Wetiko, it's all about, the centralized power and control. And what Catherine is pointing out, and the thing that I love about Catherine, I mean, not only is she just as far as a person, just an unbelievably, amazingly beautiful person, but she's somebody who's actually taking into account evil. She's dealing with evil. So many people, they just are avoiding it, or, oh, I don't want to focus on that. And unwittingly, by doing that, they're feeding evil, because, Wetiko feeds off of us turning a blind eye to it. And Catherine doesn't do that. She really is tracking evil, as am I. I was joking last night. I was giving a lecture, my first lecture in the year and a half of the lockdown, and I was in a question and answer. I randomly said, "Oh yeah, like when I find books on evil, it's like a good topic. I just love deepening my understanding of it." And Catherine is like that too, and she's also really connected with, like, the spiritual realm. And I really, really appreciate that, because when you deal with energies like the darkness, the powers and principalities in the Bible, not just personal shadow, but archetypal darkness, you can't really, if you're not connected with the spiritual realm, which is really your nature, then you don't stand a chance, really. And so I just love that about Catherine, that she, just about more than anybody is, this expert on the criminality and the corruption and evil that plays out in the world, and is super optimistic and open-hearted and loving. I'm just really inspired by that.
And we talked about the powers that be several times now, but I'm just, as you talk about that, Catherine, is it likely that many people aren't trying to be evil per se, or a nuisance. They're just not aware.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, even the powers that be, we think of the people like the Illuminati or the global elite or the 1% or whatever, they themselves are just pawns in the hands of the archetype. So, the point is that there's an archetypal higher dimensional process and people are just getting enlisted to play roles. So yeah, a lot of people, well-meaning good people, are just turning a blind eye and they're participating in the system and getting whatever benefits, and they're colluding. They're unwittingly in collusion with Wetiko, with the evil that they're actually, consciously trying to fight. So one of the things I point out, I always try to shine light on the place in us where we're complicit with Wetiko, with the very evil that we're fighting against, And yeah, so there are people, you see, the way Wetiko works, it's an archetypal energy, and what that means, it can take over a person, it can literally possess a person for a moment or for a lifetime. And then they become the outpost, they become the incarnation of that energy. And by being that, they're this filled with information. They're showing us what this formless, higher dimensional energy of Wetiko is like in human form. And people who are so possessed are oblivious. They oftentimes never feel more myself, and they just think they're acting on their own impulses. You see, the thing about Wetiko, it's like this tapeworm that gets in your body and secretes chemicals so that you start to crave food that feeds it, and it grows bigger, and it eventually kills you. And
I get it. It just makes it so complicated because of that.
Yeah. And then you see people acting out against their own best interest,
right?
Supporting politicians who are actually not serving them, and that's an expression. That's an outer reflection of the Wetiko, the workings inside their psyche. And so, yeah, there are people who just unwittingly, with the best of intentions, thinking they're doing good, are oblivious to the fact that they've offered themselves to be an instrument for Wetiko. Now, if I could just say one thing too, because it's actually really helpful. Jung himself was super switched on to Wetiko, but he didn't know the name, obviously, and he called it totalitarian psychosis. He called it a number of different names, but he was tracking the same energy, and that was his phrase. And that's an interesting phrase because the way Wetiko works in a psyche, it creates a shadow government. It gets into the executive function of the psyche, and it actually subsumes all the healthy parts of the psyche to serve the pathogen, to serve itself. And then it'll colonize the psyche, creating the shadow government, dictating to the ego, and all the while the person has no idea. And that inner process that I just described, that's the inner working of Wetiko, that's literally getting played out in the outer world, through the totalitarianism that's creeping all over the globe. Because the thing about Wetiko, what makes it so just psychedelic and mind-blowing, is that it's an inner disease of the soul that explicates itself through the medium of the outside world. It's as if this inner disease in the collective unconscious is somehow able to extend itself out into the world and configure outer events so as to synchronistically reflect the state of a psyche under its thrall. Okay, that's amazing. That's like a dream. What I'm describing, where the outer circumstances reflecting the state of the inner person, that's a dream. So the point is that encoded in Wetiko, it's helping us to wake up to the dreamlike nature, And so it's that idea, that quantum idea, that hidden, encoded in the pathogen is the medicine.
Wow, that's deep, Paul. It's deep, but it's not. You know what I mean? Like I want to learn more about this because it seems so logical. And I guess, I'm trying to put myself in the place of our viewers and listeners too, thinking what questions they might have for you. So I have to ask one question, which goes back to, I think, my very first question. And you were talking about LSD, which is a mind-altering drug.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that played into this awakening of yours? Do you feel that impacted?
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, totally. Whether it's LSD or just any plant medicines, LSD isn't a plant medicine, it's synthetic, but that can really, really help. Indigenous cultures all throughout time, they've implemented plant medicines to expand consciousness. And the thing which is cool is that when I was younger, they really helped. Whereas now I'm a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. And yeah, I'll occasionally do like plant medicine, but once, every long, long while, in the sense that once you see, then it's up to you to integrate what you've been shown, and you don't want to get attached to just doing the medicine over and over again. But yeah, no, that's absolutely part of it. But even I want to say too, you see, my life is I'm kind of embodying a certain archetypal pattern. And what I mean by that is, I was almost killed by the evil that came my way. And like I said, it destroyed my family. It created this wound. I feel like I have a scar. When you encounter archetypal evil, it changes you. And I openly share, I feel like I'm operating at under 1% of my capacity, in the sense that I was so, almost destroyed by what came my way. But yet, you see, the archetype of the shaman or like the healer who has a wound, the wounded healer, in essence has to do with when you have that encounter with the darkness and you become traumatized and you develop your wound. If you stay stuck in that, well, then, you can't really be of help for people. But the idea is from that experience, if you're able to extract the medicine and then help other people who are going through their experience of pain and suffering and darkness, that's the deeper pattern of the wounded healer and of the shaman. And, and we're all wounded healers or shamans in training. And the idea of that archetype is, yeah, the shaman, when they work with someone, they literally take on the illness. Taking it on has a double meaning. They have it out with the illness and they take it within themselves and they fall ill. And I've had a shamanic illness for 40 years. I got unbelievably sick from the abuse from my father. And then on top of that, psychiatry, I was just over my head in trauma. And yet slowly, as I connected with myself, and I'm discovering my whatever, like my inner voice and my work, I'm more and more able to offer something. And so often, every day, really, I get emails from people who are coming across my work and they're saying, "Oh my God, it's changed my life. It's helped me to understand. I found the words for what I was going through, whatever." And that's the deeper pattern that all of us, it helps us because we've all been made sick by the collective insanity. Just like a shaman, we've taken on the illness and we've fallen sick. The idea is to not stay stuck in that, but to have that experience be the portal through which you connect with your deeper healing. And so it's not just me. Yeah, that's I've been doing that in my own life for years, but that's what the deeper archetypal pattern of the wounded healer, and we're all wounded healers, that is being offered to all of us.
Wow, it's just fascinating. Your new book, which is called Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World. That'll be coming out later this year. And then you said you have another one coming out in 2022. Can you give us a little hint about each of those books and what we can look forward to?
Sure. So the one that's coming out this fall is really, and keep in mind, they were two books that were one book. I just gave the publisher, this like huge 600-page manuscript, and it's all about Wetiko because I'm just continually having these, insights and deepening understandings of Wetiko. And they asked me to cut it and make it into two books, so I did. So the first one is really about, how all the different spiritual traditions are pointing at Wetiko in their own way, and not only spiritual traditions, but artists, thinkers, and philosophers. And because in the first Wetiko book, the one that you just held up before, that one is really introducing the term Wetiko and really just trying to shed light on it so people can see it as much as I can. But then once my understanding continued to deepen, then the second book is really about the nature of the blindness, showing really distinguishing. There's all these different types of the blindnesses, because Wetiko, we're blind to that. We're blind. We're blind to the light. We can't see the light. We're blind to the dark. We can't see the dark. We're blind to that. Wetiko is actually a gift. there are all these elements of the blindness that I unfold in the next book, as well as pointing out whether it's Hawaiian Kahuna or Kabbalah or mystical Christianity or Buddhism or Philip K. Dick, just on and on. I'm Sri Aurobindo. There's all these teachers and creative artists and thinkers and spiritual traditions. And the Bible, they're literally pointing at Wetiko. And so I'm trying to offer all of those articulations to help people to see it. Because like I keep on saying, when you see it, it has no power over you. But if you don't see it, it will kill you. Now, the book coming out 2022, that's really, let's see how to describe that. That's basically pointing out that the Wetiko is this revelation. Just like the quantum revelation, the Wetiko revelation is the tentative title of the book. And I'm pointing out that Wetiko is a revelation. It's like, it's a sacred revelation. It's showing us everything we need to know to wake up to the dreamlike nature and to our dreamlike nature. And and in the book coming out next year, I really go into the whole shamanic trip, and I really point out that through our wounds and trauma and suffering, that's the way into understanding what I'm pointing at. Instead of it being the obstacle to our light, it's actually the doorway to our light. And so that's the next book. And who knows? I might even write books after that, because it's like a gift that keeps on giving. This Wetiko idea, it's just so profound. And I want to say it's getting out to the world more and more and more. I mean, I've been, like my Wetiko book, the one you held up, it's out 8.5 years, and it's selling more and more and more every year. And more and more people, people all the time are emailing, oh, this guy is mentioning Wetiko, that person was talking about it, it's in this article. It's actually entering the vernacular. Because finding the name for the offending demon, that's super important in like a myth or a fairy tale, because then you objectify it and it helps you see it, and that takes away its power.
Wow, Paul, this has been just a enlightening conversation. I so appreciate it. I hope this is not our last conversation. I hope it's the first of many to be able to share with the world your views. I'd like to ask this question to every guest before I let them go, and that is, you have a lot of work to do, but at the end of the day, what is your mission? What type of legacy do you want to leave?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Because it's interesting, when I write my books, I have a strong feeling of people in the future who are going to read the books, who are actually dreaming me up to find the words that I'm using in writing the book. And so, I have a clear sense that what the books that I'm writing, they're for current day, and they're also for people in the future. I have no doubt about that, because it's reflected back to me a lot that, I'm maybe a little bit ahead of my time. But the idea is that I think what I would like when people think of me is that, here's somebody, and I wrote a memoir really going into, my encounter with evil. And so I think it would be cool for me if people thought of me as, here's somebody who had a close encounter with evil, with archetypal evil. And, and it was horrible. And people who know me now can't even imagine what I had to go through for so many years, and actually came out of it with an open heart and with love and compassion and with awareness. And even more than that, was able to translate the experience into something that's helpful. That, I think, would be a cool way to be remembered.
Paul Levy, wow, welcome to the American Real family. If people want to reach out to you, if they're looking for your counsel, or if they want you to speak at their event, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, so the best way, awakeninthedream.com is my website. And on the website, there's a ton of free articles, because I just want this information out. And then, if you want to buy an autographed copy of the book, or you can set up a session with me, that can do that. But then you can contact me. There's a way to email me from the website, and that would really be the way to do that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I've learned so much. I know our audience has too. And again, welcome, and I hope to see you again real soon.
I would love that, Roger. Thank you so much. Really, thank you.
Thank you.